Well, I thought I would record this all in one go, but I'm just getting the hang of this video recording software that I'm using on a new system. So anyway, this is part two. And let me talk a little bit about why I think the study of Vietnam, and particularly the Vietnam War, is still relevant and still repays our attention. One might argue that the war is long over and that the issues that have been that were raised during the war and in its immediate aftermath have been largely resolved. But if you pay any attention at all to current events and to the news, you will be aware of the fact that politicians and policy experts and historians seem to always be making reference to Vietnam and to the Vietnam War. And the fact is that, at least in American consciousness, the war remains a kind of iconic event to which other events, particularly military events, are continually compared. And in the run-up to the First and the Second Iraq Wars, people kept saying, this has a potential of being another Vietnam, quote unquote. And even in more passing ways or more casual ways, the American experience in Vietnam continues to be referred to. So that's maybe the main reason. There is another reason, though, that modern Vietnam is a very interesting kind of laboratory. A laboratory for cultural study, for historical study, and so on. And it's an interesting laboratory because it's so paradoxical. On the one hand, in terms of its government, it is one of the few remaining communist countries, officially communist countries, that officially uses a Marxist-Leninist ideology to structure its government, and especially now that Cuba seems to be kind of moving away from a kind of Marxist-Leninist doctrine. Vietnam remains, in that way, weirdly isolated. And we'll talk about the reasons for this as when we get to the 19th century, and particularly French colonialism next week. But at the same time that it has this quote-unquote communist government, there is a wildly unregulated economy bubbling up in Vietnam. Not just bubbling up, but really a massively active economy that is, well, not exactly a free market economy because there's a lot of government control, is certainly energetic and motivated by profit. And so at that level, there is a great deal of I guess you just say paradox or contradiction even. And in fact, when I go to Vietnam and walk around, I'm often surprised by the fact that it doesn't blow apart in some sense, that it doesn't collapse under its own weight, particularly the really sclerotic governmental structures that you find there. Anyway, so there's that paradox. There's also a real interest in, a continuing interest in, among the Vietnamese people, the United States, and a real friendliness, perhaps strangely, given the history, toward Americans and toward the West generally, but particularly toward Americans. And this goes for American democracy as well as American cultural products. So the fact is that both in its relationship to the United States, its internal relations, particularly economic and political relations, and its relations to the rest of the world, particularly China, as we'll see, Vietnam is paradoxical. It is held in a whole series of tensions. So that's, in a nutshell, the reason that I think it's worth thinking about and paying attention to and learning the history and the culture of Vietnam. I'm going to turn now, finally, in this introduction, to talk a little bit about the way that we'll just run this class. And first of all, I'll kind of go over some of my expectations. I've already posted the official requirements for the class for how I'll evaluate grades, and I'll be soon posting the due dates for all of those assignments. But let me just say that this is a class that covers a great long period of history, which generally implies the need for learning at least some dates and the names of some figures, and since they're mostly Vietnamese names, especially in the earlier history, they're strange and difficult for Americans to pronounce. My view of dates is that there are a few that you really need to know, and I will kind of insist on those. I'll highlight those. 1954, the Geneva Convention. But more generally, in terms of timelines and history, I'm interested in periods and in students having a general sense of this period follows that period, and the relationship between the periods is such and such. For instance, there's a long early history of Vietnam that Woods covers, and then he makes a transition to the millennium of Chinese domination. And you need to have, in general, a sense of when those occurred and why they're important. So that's as far as dates go, and I'll highlight the specific dates that I want you to really hang on to in an exact way. Beyond that, I'm mostly interested in periods and in sequence. I'm much more interested in concepts. We're going to talk about concepts like political authority, we're going to talk about some concepts that have specifically to do with language. We're going to talk about concepts that have to do with certainly the use of military force and so on. So those concepts, and again, I'll highlight them both in my little video presentations, in the course readings, and in some of the PowerPoint sequences that I'll be posting over the weeks. You should be able to have a sense of what those concepts are, and certainly the texts and the readings that we look at will highlight those as well. I've already mentioned names, but Vietnamese names are tough for Westerners. And when I talk about the language a little bit, you'll later this week you'll learn about just why they're tough for Westerners. But there will be, a dozen or so, maybe a few more than that, Vietnamese names that you're just going to need to know. So you'll need to write them down and basically memorize them. A fairly large portion of this class will consist of watching films. And sometimes they'll be documentary, but sometimes they'll be standard dramatic films. And I do that partly because this is an online course and that's an efficient way to get information across to you. But I usually do it when I teach this course in the classroom as well, because it seems like the things that I want to talk about that have to do with Vietnam have been, in many cases, well covered in film. So when you watch dramatic films in particular, you need to pay attention to the general outline of the plot, what happens first, what happens second, and why, so on and so forth. Names of main characters, minor characters, I'm not too worried about, but certainly you need to watch for and maybe jot down the names of the central characters. And then by far the most important, and this kind of goes back to my discussion a moment ago of concepts for the course in general, you need to think about themes. So the themes of the films are particularly important. What big idea is the film putting across? With documentary film, It's much more like reading a newspaper article. You're watching it to extract factual information. So I think that for now that will serve with the previous video as a kind of quick introduction to the course, and I'm going to be doing these little mini videos on a much more kind of focused, subject-oriented basis as we go along. I'm not sure how many I'll do, but I'll do quite a few. And they'll be supplemented with PowerPoint presentations that are largely images with some text, but the images are there to illustrate, in many cases, the readings and what I talk about in these videos. I'm still fooling around with some other video technology where I might be able to actually do some voiceovers and that sort of thing. I'm hoping that will work out. I have to say, the last time I taught this course online, the technology was a good deal more primitive. I'm enjoying this, but I'm also experiencing the old problem of the learning curve, so I hope you'll bear with me. But anyway, again, welcome to the course, and I apologize again for a slightly slow start, but my intention in any case has been that this week we'll be doing background and kind of ramping up, and then the middle 2 weeks of the semester will be very focused, and there will be quite a bit of required of you, and then in that final week we will ramp down a bit, talking mostly about contemporary Vietnam, and mostly we'll be reading some of the articles that I've archived over the years from the New York Times and other sources that have to do with various things that are going on in Vietnam now. So thanks, and I'll be back in touch with you soon.